There are truths humanity prefers to keep hidden in the shadows, not because they are inherently dangerous, but because they reveal something profoundly unsettling about the reality everyone believes they inhabit. For decades, three brilliant minds dedicated their lives to deciphering the most fundamental mysteries of existence, independently reaching conclusions that shook the foundations of established knowledge. Their discoveries were not merely academic theories destined to remain in dusty libraries, but practical, verifiable revelations that demonstrated human capabilities considered impossible by conventional science. What made these discoveries even more extraordinary was the fact that, despite working on different continents, without direct communication with each other, they all arrived at strikingly similar descriptions of the nature of consciousness and the fundamental structure of the universe. What made these discoveries even more extraordinary was the fact that, despite working on different continents, without direct communication with each other, they all arrived at strikingly similar descriptions of the nature of consciousness and the fundamental structure of the universe. Their research pointed to an inevitable and disturbing conclusion. Everything we call solid physical reality is, in fact, a holographic projection generated by consciousness itself. And human beings possess inherent capabilities to shape and transform this projection in ways that completely defy our current understanding of the limits of the possible. Itzhak Bentov was an inventor and scientist whose restless mind was never satisfied with superficial answers. Born in an era of great technological and scientific transformations, he developed an insatiable curiosity about the hidden mechanisms governing both the microcosm and macrocosm of existence. His initial investigations focused on measurable physical phenomena, but gradually he realized that there were recurring patterns at all scales of reality, from the movement of subatomic particles to the rotation of distant galaxies. This perception led him to question the artificial separation between consciousness and matter, between observer and observed, between mind and universe. Bentov began to develop complex mathematical models that described consciousness not as an epiphenomenon emerging from biological processes, but as a fundamental and primary aspect of the cosmos's very structure. His theories proposed that every thought, every emotion, every human intention creates ripples in the invisible fabric that permeates all existence, and that these ripples interact and intertwine with the ripples generated by all other consciousnesses, forming interference patterns that eventually materialize as the events and objects we perceive as solid physical reality. Michael Talbot brought a different yet complementary perspective to these revolutionary investigations. His approach combined scientific rigor with a genuine openness to phenomena that mainstream academia preferred to ignore or ridicule. Talbot studied documented cases of spontaneous healing, extrasensory perception, near-death experiences, and other phenomena considered anomalous by conventional science, seeking to identify underlying patterns that could explain these occurrences within a coherent theoretical framework. His research led him to the concept of the hologram as a functional metaphor for understanding the nature of reality. In a traditional hologram, each small fragment contains information about the entire image, albeit with lower resolution. And this extraordinary property offered an elegant explanation for countless mysteries that baffled both scientists and mystics. If the universe indeed operates according to holographic principles, then every particle of matter, every point in space, every moment in time would contain encoded information about the totality of existence. This would explain how genuine psychics can access information about events distant in space or time, how healers can influence biological processes in bodies that are not their own, how separate minds can share thoughts and emotions without apparent physical communication. Jacobo Grinberg brought impeccable academic credentials to investigations most of his colleagues considered pseudoscience. As a neurophysiologist trained at the best institutions in Mexico and the United States, he had all the necessary tools for a conventional and respectable career studying already well-mapped brain processes. But Grinberg possessed a rare intellectual courage that drove him to investigate precisely those phenomena other scientists avoided for fear of damaging their reputations. He began by studying traditional Mexican shamans who performed what were considered miraculous healings, using sophisticated electroencephalography equipment to map brain activity patterns during healing rituals. What he discovered surpassed all expectations. The brains of these shamans exhibited extraordinary coherence patterns during altered states of consciousness, with different brain regions synchronizing their activities in ways never observed in ordinary people. Even more impressively, Grinberg detected measurable correlations between the shaman's brain patterns and physiological changes in the treated patients, even when there was no direct physical contact between them. These discoveries led him to develop his synergistic theory, which proposed the existence of a fundamental informational field he called the lattice, a holographic matrix that connects all consciousnesses and serves as the substrate upon which perceived reality is built. The trajectories of these three researchers converged on a disturbing conclusion that none of them could ignore. Human consciousness is not merely a passive observer of an independent external reality, but an active participant in the continuous generation of that reality. Every discovery they made, every experiment they conducted, every case they documented, added more evidence to this revolutionary model. Bentov demonstrated that experienced meditators could deliberately alter brainwave frequencies to synchronize with specific planetary resonances, creating states of expanded consciousness where normal barriers between subject and object, between inner and outer, simply dissolved. Talbot cataloged hundreds of cases where ordinary people, when placed in states of extreme necessity or danger, manifested extraordinary capabilities that remained latent during normal daily life. Grinberg measured and quantified changes in neural activity that correlated perfectly with changes in the perception of reality, demonstrating that the brain does not simply receive information from an external world, but actively constructs the experience of reality through processes we are only just beginning to understand. What happened to these three pioneers after their revolutionary discoveries cannot be explained simply as coincidence or bad luck. Their stories share unsettling elements that suggest more sinister patterns operating behind the scenes of society. When independent researchers begin to uncover truths that threaten established paradigms, especially truths that could free humanity from artificially imposed limitations, forces emerge that prefer to maintain the status quo unchanged. History is replete with examples of suppressed discoveries, silenced inventors, scientists whose careers were destroyed not by flaws in their research, but precisely because their research was too valid, too revolutionary, too dangerous for the power systems that rely on collective ignorance to maintain control. The disappearance of these three men, each at the peak of their most important contributions, each on the verge of publications that could completely transform our understanding of human nature, raises questions that cannot be easily dismissed as paranoia or unfounded conspiracy theory. Bentov was scheduled to present his latest discoveries at an international conference when he boarded that fateful flight. The details of what he planned to reveal were never fully clarified, but close colleagues mentioned that he had developed practical techniques that would allow any ordinary person to access expanded states of consciousness previously reserved only for mystics and dedicated meditators after decades of practice. His personal notes suggested that he had precisely mapped the exact frequencies needed to synchronize individual consciousness with broader informational fields, creating possibilities for non-local communication and perception beyond conventional sensory limits. Even more disturbingly, documents later revealed showed that specific government agencies had a direct interest in his research, particularly those related to the influence of consciousness on physical and biological systems. During the Cold War, when world superpowers competed not only in conventional armaments, but also in potential psychic capabilities, any researcher who demonstrated genuine results in this area automatically attracted the attention of organizations operating in the shadowy borders between science, intelligence, and population control. The fact that Bentov met his end in a disaster that killed hundreds of innocent people could seem like a perfect cover if someone wanted to discreetly eliminate a specific individual while masking the assassination as a random tragedy. Talbot faced different yet equally unsettling challenges. As his investigations deepened, he began to document not only isolated phenomena, but systematic patterns that suggested the existence of mind control and perceptual manipulation technologies being implemented on a large scale. His research led him to examine how certain power groups might be using knowledge about the holographic nature of reality to manipulate entire populations, creating collective narratives that artificially limited what people believed was possible. He discovered that when entire populations are convinced that they are powerless, that they have no control over their lives, that they are at the mercy of uncontrollable external forces, they do indeed become powerless, not due to inherent limitation, but due to unconscious self-sabotage based on false but deeply ingrained beliefs. Talbot began to see connections between educational systems that discourage independent thought, media outlets that promote passivity and constant fear, religious institutions that preach submission instead of genuine spiritual empowerment, and materialistic scientific paradigms that systematically deny any evidence of extraordinary human capabilities. He realized that all these seemingly disconnected systems, in fact, served a unified purpose: to keep humanity ignorant of its true potential. His last interviews revealed a man increasingly concerned about his own safety, mentioning that he had received veiled warnings to cease certain lines of investigation. When he disappeared from public view, few asked serious questions about the circumstances. Grinberg faced the most mysterious fate of all. In Mexico, where his reputation as a serious scientist made it difficult to simply dismiss him as a charlatan, he continued his revolutionary research with legitimate university funding and publications in respected journals. His experiments measurably and repeatably demonstrated that separate consciousnesses could establish instantaneous correlations across space, defying limitations imposed by the speed of light, and suggesting that the separation between individuals is far more illusory than real. More disturbing to certain authorities, Grinberg was developing training protocols that would allow ordinary people to systematically develop higher levels of neural coherence, potentially unlocking latent capabilities to directly influence the holographic matrix he called the lattice. Imagine the implications. If entire populations mastered techniques to increase their coherence with the fundamental field of reality, becoming conscious co-creators instead of passive victims of circumstances, all control systems based on keeping people in states of powerlessness and fear would simply collapse. Grinberg was on the verge of publishing a book that would synthesize decades of research into a practical manual accessible to anyone when he simply disappeared without a trace. No body was found, no farewell note, no plausible explanation. Authorities suggested various scenarios, from voluntary departure to involvement in criminal activities, but nothing was ever proven. Colleagues and students reported that in the days before his disappearance, Grinberg seemed anxious, mentioning that he had made even deeper discoveries that he intended to reveal soon, discoveries that could change everything forever. The patterns are undeniable when examined with careful attention. 3 researchers working independently, arriving at similar conclusions through different methodologies, all documenting extraordinary human capabilities that challenge established paradigms, all attracting the attention of governmental and intelligence organizations, all disappearing or dying under questionable circumstances precisely when they were about to release their most important discoveries to the general public. The statistical probability of these coincidences occurring randomly is astronomically low. But accepting the alternative means confronting an even more disturbing reality: that there are organized forces actively dedicated to suppressing knowledge that could free humanity from artificially imposed limitations. This is not paranoid fantasy, but a historical pattern documented repeatedly in various contexts. Whenever genuinely revolutionary discoveries threaten to destabilize established power structures, these discoveries and their discoverers face resistance that goes far beyond healthy academic skepticism, entering territories of deliberate sabotage, coordinated defamation, and, in extreme cases, physical elimination. To truly understand why these discoveries posed such a significant threat to established powers, it is necessary to delve into the practical implications of the theories these researchers developed. The idea that reality operates according to holographic principles is not a mere philosophical abstraction without tangible consequences. When correctly understood and systematically applied, this understanding bestows extraordinary capabilities that completely transform the relationship between individual consciousness and the manifested world. Bentov demonstrated through carefully controlled experiments that all physical matter, from subatomic particles to massive galaxies, exists in a constant state of vibration. Nothing is truly static or solid in the way our physical senses suggest. The table that feels so solid under your hands is actually a field of energy vibrating at specific frequencies. And the only reason you perceive it as solid is because your senses are calibrated to interpret those particular frequencies as solidity. But if consciousness can modulate its own vibrational frequencies, synchronizing with different bands of the energetic spectrum, then seemingly absolute barriers between states of matter, between separate spatial localities, between distinct temporal moments begin to reveal their true nature as relative perceptual constructs rather than absolute limitations. Bentov developed detailed maps showing how different states of consciousness correlate with different frequency patterns in the human nervous system. During ordinary waking states, the brain operates predominantly in beta frequencies, generating fragmented perceptions of an external world separate from the observer. But when consciously trained through specific techniques of breathing, visualization, and attentional focus, the brain can transition into alpha, theta, and even delta states while maintaining complete conscious lucidity. In these altered states, normal perceptual boundaries begin to dissolve, revealing deeper layers of reality that remain invisible during normal everyday consciousness. Even more significantly, Bentov discovered that there is a specific frequency of approximately 7 cycles per second that harmonically resonates with Earth's own electromagnetic field, a phenomenon known as Schumann resonance. When practitioners manage to stabilize their brainwave patterns at this particular frequency, something extraordinary occurs. Individual consciousness synchronizes with the broader planetary field, preserving states of expanded perception where normally inaccessible information becomes directly available to conscious awareness. This synchronization activates dormant structures in the brain, particularly the pineal gland, which ancient spiritual traditions recognized as a portal to higher dimensions of perception. Talbot's research revealed that the holographic model elegantly explains phenomena that completely baffle conventional materialistic scientific paradigms. In a physical hologram created through light wave interference, each fragment contains information about the total image, only with progressively lower resolution as the fragments shrink. This fundamental mathematical property of holograms offers a perfect framework for understanding how seemingly separate consciousnesses can access information about spatially or temporally distant events. If the entire universe operates according to holographic principles, then every point in space-time contains encoded information about the totality of past, present, and future existence. Human consciousness, when properly tuned, can decode this holographically distributed information, explaining genuine clairvoyance, documented precognition, verifiable past life memories, and countless other phenomena considered impossible by scientific models that assume absolute separation between observers and observed events. Talbot cataloged hundreds of meticulously documented cases where ordinary people, without special training, spontaneously accessed holographic information during vivid dreams, near-death experiences, or moments of extreme crisis that temporarily broke normal perceptual filters. Grinberg took these understandings into even more revolutionary territories with his synergistic theory and the concept of the lattice. Through decades of rigorous neurophysiological research, he demonstrated that the brain does not simply receive sensory data from the external environment and process it passively, but actively constructs perceptual experience through complex neural algorithms that interact with a fundamental informational field permeating all space. This field, which he called the lattice, functions as a primordial holographic matrix from which all manifested experiences emerge. Each individual's brain operates as a transducer that converts unmanifested potentialities contained within the lattice into concrete perceptual experiences. But here is the crucial revelation that Grinberg repeatedly emphasized. The transduction process is not unidirectional. Consciousness not only receives information from the lattice, but continuously feeds information back into the lattice, modifying and shaping the fundamental field from which future experiences will emerge. The greater an individual's neural coherence, the more synchronized the brain's various regions operate in integrated harmony, the greater their ability to deliberately influence the lattice and consequently shape manifested reality. Grinberg intensively studied traditional shamans who demonstrated extraordinary capabilities considered impossible by conventional science. Using sophisticated electroencephalography equipment, he mapped brain activity patterns during healing rituals where shamans performed interventions that completely defied orthodox medical understanding. What he discovered was revealing. During deep shamanic states, the practitioner's brain exhibited extraordinarily high levels of neural coherence, with brainwaves from different regions synchronizing perfectly in complex harmonic patterns. In these states of supercoherence, the shamans were not working through normal physical processes of cause and effect, but operating directly at the lattice level, where unmanifested potentialities could be modified before crystallizing into physical reality. This explained how seemingly miraculous healings occurred instantly, without the gradual recovery period that characterizes normal biological processes. The shaman was not healing the physical body through conventional biochemical mechanisms, but directly modifying the informational pattern in the lattice from which the physical body continuously emerges and reconstitutes itself. The implications of these discoveries are absolutely revolutionary and perfectly explain why established forces would have powerful motivation to suppress this knowledge. If every human being possesses the latent capacity to increase their neural coherence and consequently their influence over the fundamental lattice of reality, then all control systems based on convincing people of their fundamental powerlessness simply collapse. Imagine a humanity that deeply understands that it is not a passive victim of external circumstances, but an active co-creator continuously participating in the generation of reality through its habitual patterns of thought, emotion, and intention. Such humanity could not be easily manipulated through fear, propaganda, or narratives of limitation. Economic systems based on artificial scarcity, political structures dependent on docile populations accepting external authority without question, medical paradigms that treat bodies as mechanical machines without their own agency, all these systems would lose power over populations that master practical techniques to access and influence the most fundamental levels of reality. The most urgent question emerging from these revelations is not simply whether these theories are true, but how to practically apply them in the daily lives of ordinary people who are not scientists, shamans, or dedicated mystics. Grinberg recognized this need and dedicated years to developing systematic protocols that anyone could follow to progressively increase their neural coherence and, consequently, their ability to consciously interact with the lattice. His allocentric meditation technique represents a brilliant synthesis of ancient contemplative wisdom and modern neuroscience, offering a structured path to deep perceptual transformation. The method works through the progressive integration of different sensory modalities into a unified field of simultaneous awareness, gradually breaking down the fragmenting filters that normally divide experience into separate categories of bodily sensation, mental thought, visceral emotion, auditory perception, and visual perception. During ordinary states of consciousness, attention constantly jumps between these different channels of experience, creating the illusion of separation between the inner observer and the observed external world. But when all these perceptual streams are held simultaneously in integrated awareness, something fundamental changes in the structure of consciousness itself. The practice begins with basic body awareness, bringing total attention to physical sensations without judgment or interpretation. Practitioners learn to feel the entire body as a unified field of vibrating energy rather than a collection of separate parts. As this body awareness stabilizes, Breath awareness is added, observing the continuous flow of air entering and exiting without trying to control or modify it. Breath serves as a perfect bridge between conscious and unconscious processes, between voluntary and involuntary, offering an anchoring point for expanded awareness. The next step incorporates thoughts and emotions into the field of awareness, observing them as phenomena that arise and disappear within consciousness rather than identifying with them as expressions of the true self. This stage often reveals profound insights into the transient and constructed nature of what we normally call self, gradually dissolving the feeling of being a separate entity isolated within a physical body. As bodily sensations, breath, thoughts, and emotions are held simultaneously in non-judgmental awareness, auditory perception is added, opening completely to all sounds in the environment without filtering or categorizing, simply allowing sound waves to resonate through the total field of expanded consciousness. Finally, visual perception is incorporated, keeping eyes open with a soft focus that doesn't fixate on any particular object but embraces the entire visual field simultaneously. At this point, if the practice has been developed correctly through gradual progression, the practitioner maintains simultaneous awareness of bodily sensations, breath, thoughts, emotions, sounds, and visions, all integrated into a unified field of non-dual perception. Grinberg discovered through precise electroencephalographic measurements that when practitioners achieve this state of complete integration, brainwave patterns exhibit dramatically increased coherence, with different regions of the brain synchronizing in ways never observed during ordinary fragmented consciousness. Even more significantly, this neural synchronization directly correlates with measurable changes in the subjective experience of reality. Practitioners consistently reported sensations of expansion beyond normal bodily limits, direct perception of the fundamental interconnectedness between all phenomena, dissolution of rigid boundaries between self and other, between inner and outer, between past and future. These were not simply vague mystical experiences, but specific perceptual transformations that corresponded precisely to theoretical predictions about how high coherence consciousness interacts with the fundamental lattice. Bentov developed complementary techniques focused specifically on conscious manipulation of subjective time. He recognized that our normal experience of time as a continuous linear flow is actually a perceptual construct that can be modified through alterations in neural frequency patterns. Reality, according to his models, does not flow continuously, but flashes in and out of existence in extremely rapid cycles, approximately 50 times per second. During each cycle, the entire universe literally disappears into unmanifested potentiality, and then re-emerges in a new, slightly modified configuration. Normally, we do not perceive this pulsating nature of reality because our consciousness is automatically synchronized with the pulsation rate, creating the illusion of smooth continuity. But Bentov developed specific visualization exercises that allow consciousness to slow down sufficiently to begin perceiving the intervals between pulsations. As awareness expands into these intervals, subjective time dramatically dilates. Moments that would normally pass in a fraction of a second can expand into periods that subjectively seem to last minutes or even hours, offering extraordinary opportunities for profound insights, creative solutions to complex problems, or simply the experience of fully absorbed presence free from the constant pressure of linear time rushing by. Talbot emphasized practical applications of these understandings for healing and personal transformation. If the physical body is a holographic projection, continuously emerging from informational patterns stored in the fundamental field, then by modifying these patterns through intentional visualization and elevated emotional states, it is possible to influence healing processes that seem miraculous from conventional materialistic perspectives. He documented numerous cases where individuals with diagnoses considered terminal or incurable by orthodox medicine achieved complete recovery through techniques that worked directly at the holographic level. These techniques typically involve creating extremely vivid mental images of perfect health, holding these images with total emotional conviction while in altered states of consciousness where neural coherence is elevated. The key is not simply to wish for health or think positively in a superficial way. but to truly inhabit the perceptual reality of complete health, so deeply that the body has no choice but to reorganize itself to align with the modified informational pattern. This requires extraordinary mental discipline and the ability to sustain elevated states of consciousness that most people never develop because they have been conditioned since childhood to accept narratives of limitation and powerlessness. What makes these practices truly dangerous for established control systems is precisely their accessibility. They do not require special equipment, institutional affiliation, authorization from external authorities, or significant financial investment. Anyone with genuine determination can begin applying these principles immediately, verifying results through direct experience without relying on intermediaries or knowledge keepers. As more individuals master these capabilities and begin demonstrating results impossible according to conventional paradigms, the dominant narrative of human limitation becomes unsustainable. Populations awakened to their true potential do not passively accept living conditions they know can be transformed. They do not remain trapped in economic, political, medical, or educational systems that serve the interests of a few at the expense of many. They begin questioning all authority structures that claim power over fundamental aspects of human existence. Recognizing that genuine power has always resided within individual and collective consciousness itself. The stories of these three extraordinary researchers did not end with their disappearances, but continue to reverberate through every person who chooses to awaken to the truths they dedicated their lives to revealing. Their works remain available in scattered fragments, discontinued books, obscure academic articles, recordings of old lectures, testimonies of students who had the privilege of learning directly from them before they were silenced. Each preserved fragment carries seeds of a perceptual revolution that can blossom in the consciousness of any individual brave enough to question established narratives about the nature of reality and the limits of the possible. Their legacy is not just abstract theories destined to remain on academic shelves, but an urgent call for every awakened human being to take responsibility for their own conscious evolution and for the role they play in the continuous co-creation of collective reality. We live in a unique historical moment where ancient spiritual wisdom converges with cutting-edge scientific discoveries, revealing fundamental truths that have been systematically hidden or distorted over millennia of cultural and institutional conditioning. The deeper reality emerging from all these investigations is simultaneously liberating and intimidating. There are no true victims in this holographic universe, only co-creators who have temporarily forgotten their inherent power. Every circumstance you face, every challenge that seems external and beyond your control, every limitation you accept as absolute and immutable, all are holographic reflections of informational patterns stored in the deepest levels of your own consciousness. The interacting with humanity's collective patterns, and with the fundamental lattice that sustains all manifestation. This understanding does not mean blaming individuals for suffering caused by oppressive systems, but recognizing that even seemingly omnipotent systems exist only because millions of individual consciousnesses continuously sustain them through unconscious beliefs, habitual emotional patterns, and focused attention that feeds energy into structures that would otherwise collapse from lack of support. The moment a sufficient critical mass of consciousnesses awakens to these truths and begins deliberately redirecting attentional energy away from narratives of fear, scarcity, and limitation towards visions of expanded possibility, genuine cooperation, and shared abundance, the old structures simply cannot maintain coherence and inevitably dissolve. Bentov, Talbot, and Grinberg paid extreme prices for daring to map territories that the guardians of established knowledge preferred to keep inaccessible. But their sacrifice was not in vain if those who encounter their discoveries choose to honor them not through passive lamentation, but through active application of the principles they revealed. Every person who masters techniques to increase neural coherence, every practitioner who learns to synchronize consciousness with fundamental planetary resonances, every courageous explorer who dissolves perceptual boundaries between self and cosmos becomes a living continuation of the work these pioneers began. The revolution they envisioned does not require violence, conflict, or the forced overthrow of external structures, but simply a massive awakening to latent capabilities that have always resided dormant within every human being, awaiting recognition and conscious cultivation. As more individuals access states of expanded consciousness where fundamental holographic truths become directly evident through first-person experience, old lies about human limitation lose persuasive power, and systems built upon those lies begin to crumble under the weight of their own internal contradictions. The present moment carries particular urgency because mind control and perceptual manipulation technologies have reached unprecedented sophistication. Algorithmic systems track every click, every search, every digital interaction, building detailed psychological profiles used to target messages specifically designed to keep individuals trapped in loops of fear, distraction, and compulsive consumption. Artificial electromagnetic fields saturate modern environments, potentially interfering with natural resonances that Bentov identified as crucial for expanded states of consciousness. Chemical additives in food, water, and air may be deliberately chosen to calcify the pineal gland and decrease neural coherence. Educational systems continue to produce generations trained for passive memorization rather than independent critical thinking, for obedience to external authorities rather than trust in internal wisdom. In the face of all these converging forces designed to keep humanity asleep, awakening becomes not just an interesting possibility, but an existential imperative for anyone who values conscious sovereignty and genuine self-determination. But even recognizing the magnitude of the challenges, there are profound reasons for optimism founded on understandings about the holographic nature of reality. Because information is holographically distributed throughout the total field, even a small number of individuals operating in high coherence can disproportionately influence the total collective pattern. Studies on mass meditation have repeatedly shown that when only a small fraction of a city's population simultaneously practices conscious coherence techniques, measurable rates of crime, violence, and conflict significantly decrease during periods of practice, suggesting that coherent consciousnesses literally alter the shared informational field that influences the behaviors of everyone within range. This means that you don't have to wait until billions awaken to start seeing transformative changes in collective reality. Critical mass may be much smaller than most assume. Perhaps only a small percentage of the global population operating in consistent states of elevated coherence would be enough to tip the entire system toward more harmonious and evolutionarily advanced configurations. Every choice you make about where you direct your attention, which narratives you feed with emotional energy, which states of consciousness you cultivate through daily practices, all contribute to the total holographic pattern from which future realities will emerge. There are no insignificant actions when the interconnected nature of all existence is understood. The deep inner work you perform within your own consciousness inevitably reverberates through the lattice, influencing possibilities available to all other beings sharing this unified field. This is not magical thinking or naive optimism, but a direct and inevitable consequence of the fundamental principles that Bentov, Talbot, and Grinberg spent decades verifying through rigorous scientific methodologies. You are literally a conscious node within an infinitely interconnected holographic network, and the quality of your individual vibration affects the quality of the total network, just as each individual instrument contributes to the harmony or dissonance of a complete symphony. The tools necessary for profound transformation are already available, awaiting only dedicated application. Preserve the original language of the text. With the resources you have, practicing simple techniques that gradually expand your capacity for integrated awareness and elevated neural coherence. Dedicating even 15 minutes daily to allocentric meditation, starting with body awareness and progressively incorporating breath, thoughts, emotions, sounds, and visual perception into a unified field can initiate neuroplastic changes that fundamentally transform how consciousness interacts with manifested reality. Experiment with the temporal dilation exercises suggested by Bentov, carefully observing how subjective time can be shaped through intentional shifts in attentional focus. Work with vivid visualizations of desired outcomes while in emotionally elevated states, implanting new informational patterns into the lattice that will inevitably manifest as coherence increases. Document your experiences, observe patterns, refine practices based on verifiable results through direct experience. Most importantly, share discoveries with others who demonstrate a genuine openness to explore beyond the boundaries of established knowledge. The truths revealed by these three pioneering researchers should not remain esoteric knowledge accessible only to a few initiates, but become common wisdom available to all humanity. Every person who awakens to these realities and begins applying them practically becomes a beacon for others still lost in narratives of limitation and separation. Form communities of practice where conscious explorers can support each other, share insights, compare experiences, and collectively refine techniques. The resistance these researchers faced clearly demonstrates that established forces would prefer to keep this knowledge suppressed. But in an era of decentralized digital communication, information can no longer be fully controlled by centralized gatekeepers. Every shared video, every distributed text, every sincere conversation about these possibilities plants seeds that can blossom in consciousnesses ready to receive them. Humanity's future is not fixed on a predetermined trajectory, but remains fluid and malleable, continuously responding to inputs from billions of individual consciousnesses co-creating through their habitual patterns of thought, emotion, and intention. You have far greater power than you have been taught to believe, latent capabilities awaiting activation through recognition and conscious cultivation. The revelations that cost Bentov, Talbot, and Grinberg their freedoms or lives are now in your hands, offering a fundamental choice: to continue sleeping comfortably within established narratives of limitation, or to awaken to the extraordinary responsibility and limitless possibility that comes with recognizing that you are a conscious co-creator actively participating in the continuous generation of reality. The choice has always been yours, just waiting for you to reclaim the power that has always resided within you. Share in the comments how these revelations resonated with you. What experiences have you had that now make more sense in light of these understandings? Are you willing to explore the practices described and document your discoveries? This community exists to support courageous explorers willing to question everything and verify truths through direct experience. Subscribe to follow future investigations that continue to unravel mysteries that would prefer to remain hidden, but which awakened humanity deserves to know.